Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the group object commandlet. So this is in addition to other videos I've done previously looking at some of the basic commandlets that we have in PowerShell that manipulate objects. And this one would kind of be along those lines as well. So I'm doing this video because I got a comment from, I think, my last video on HTML reporting where somebody asked to have a look at this and another particular commandlet. So I figured I'd put together a quick video here, or at least quick for me anyway, on looking at what group object can do for us. So let me switch over to my desktop here. So I'm just on the desktop of my home Windows 10 computer here. And let me change over to, well, actually, before I even do that, let's maybe do something that makes some output here. So let's maybe do something like get service and grab all the services that start with the letter B. And if I look here, I can see that I have particular objects being outputted. So this commandlet produces some objects, puts it into PowerShell's pipeline, and because I don't have anything else that I want to do with it, those objects are being outputted to the screen here. Now, if I want to see what kind of objects are there, I could take the output of this and pipe it to our fairly popular commandlet here, get member, or the alias that goes with it of just GM. And that would show me, let me make this a little bigger here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. That would show me what type of object was being put into the pipeline by that commandlet. Right? So we can see that when I run this, it's putting service controllers into the pipeline. And if you want the full .NET framework name, it would be this right here. Okay. Now you could also get how many of something. So if I wanted to do like a measure object, I can say, hey, this particular commandlet here with the parameter that I'm providing it was producing 11 objects. So it produced 11 service controller objects. Okay? Now, where group object comes into play is, let's say, for instance, I examine the output here and I see that there's a few different values here in status, right? And what I'd like to do is find out how many of each are there. So that's where group object can come into play. So if we kind of run to that group object and I tell it to look at the status property, okay, so if you look again, our service controllers, okay, they do have a status property, and we can see that here if I just go ahead and run to this. We could see that it took a look and found that for status, 6 of the objects had a value of stopped, and 5 of the objects in the pipeline had a value of running. And if you also want to see it, it grabs those 6 objects and puts them in a property called group, which is basically like a collection. So in fact, if I take this output and pipe it to get member, you can see that its group here is a collections object, right? So basically it has those service controllers inside of it. Okay, so we can see we had 6 that were stopped and 5 that were running. Now, if you look at the help on group object, you could also see that there are some other parameters here you could play around with. So for instance, the most popular one is obviously using property. This set of brackets here tells me it's positional. Okay, so that means I could just put the value of status without typing out property. And it could potentially group on multiple properties here. That's what this tells me right here. It'll take multiple values. So we can see we have hash table, kick out output as string, look at the values as case sensitive, culture, input objects, that would be for piping data into it, which is what we were doing. And no element, what that one does is if you look at the output just normal here, and if I use no element, see how it doesn't include the group. Right? So this is left aside, if you will. Right? Now, if you do have it putting out this output here, you can break apart this group here if you wanted to do it. Okay, you could get the objects back out of there. It takes a little bit of legwork to do it because basically what you need to do is you need to kind of extract these objects out of this property for the object that's in the pipeline, okay, which is a group object. Okay, that's what group object is doing here. So if I took this and piped it to get member, you can see that by running group object, its output is a group info object, and the group property has the original objects in the pipeline in it as a collection. So the 6 that were running and the 6 that were stopped and the 5 that were running, right? So if I wanted to kind of break these out, so just these 6 were back into the pipeline, what I could do is isolate on the first object in the pipeline, this first group info object, which I could do by piping this over to select object and maybe saying I want the first one, right? So grab that, and then um, and then what I could also do is use another parameter on select object called expand property and tell it I want to expand the group property. So what it will do is it'll take the objects that are in the group property and put those objects in the pipeline. So it'll toss out the group info object and then put in whatever objects were inside the group property. All right, like so. And if I pipe this over to get member, I can see, hey, our surface controllers are back, right? However, just the ones that, again, were stopped in this case, right? So I guess it could act as kind of like a crude filter as well if you wanted to do that, right? But let me do another scenario here that might be of use to you. It certainly is for me. So this is one that I use in my actual real life, if you will. And so basically, I'm going to change over to a directory that has a bunch of just files in it that I've done for different classes that I've taught. So if you look at the hard drive on my computer, I have like all of these different class folders that are for different classes that I've taught in the recent past. And I usually leave them lying around for a little bit because every now and again I'll get a student that might email me from a class that I've taught previously, like in the last couple months or so, and they'll ask, hey, remember that example we were looking at in class? Did you still happen to have that? So if I have it, I can email it to them and away we go. So this directory, it has a bunch of files in it. Okay, it also has a bunch of subdirectories in it, which again have other files in them as well. Okay, so now if you're not familiar with doing dir, I mean, that is the alias for PowerShell, which is get child item, right? Okay, so I could go ahead and run that. And I could see all the files in this folder, right? Now you're probably thinking, well, that's not really all that special, right? So first things first is I want to just look at the files. I don't really care about folders. And I do believe get child item has that on it there. Where I could just use the dash file parameter, and now I just see files, right? So now what I want to do is I want to examine the first one. So I'm going to take this, send it to select object, and we'll grab the first one and we'll look at all of the properties on it. Okay, not just what it's showing me right here. Right. So for the very first file, this az040 make VM ps1 script. So obviously this folder was for at least a PowerShell class, the AZ040. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for extension. Okay, and notice PS1, right? So what I can do is let's say I want to see like how many of each kind of file are in this directory structure. Okay, so first of all, there I want to see the main directory and subfolders. So let me use recurse. Okay, and now, so that'll look at that main class folder and then look at the subfolders inside of it as well. And then what we want to do is we want to use group object, and the property we want to use this time is extension. And so now this could tell me how much of each type of file is in here. So I could see I have 127 PS1 files, one P7B, that's a digital certificate file, one CER, 12 XMLs, three JSON, JPEGs, 21 PSM1, those are PowerShell module files, PSD1, I got 11 of those are PowerShell manifest files, 20 DATs, right? So that's, what is that coming from? I think that's from a zip archive. A NuGet package right here. So that's basically um, a downloadable file for a PowerShell module. So I could see the different distributions of files that I have in this directory structure. And for each group, so let's say the 127 PS1 files, I could see in the group the actual like file objects, if you will. So what that then allows me to do is maybe I can see how big each of these things are, right? So, how much space are the PS1 files taking? How much space is the executables taking, the text files, the JPEGs, and so on. So with this, basically what I could do is I could take the files that are here and I could use, make my own property that adds all of this stuff up, right? So if you don't know how to do that, let's take the group object out of it. Let's just say I'm doing a get child item. Notice that on this type of object, so if I do a get member here, I can see that we have this file info object, and you'll see that a size is there as length. Okay, so that's the length property. So when you look at the output here, you can see for all the files, they each have their own length. So all I need to do is take the objects that are in the pipeline and add up the lengths. Okay, which is not that hard to do with PowerShell. You just have to use another commandlet to do it, right? So we could use measure object, and the property I want is length, and I want to add everything up. So I want to do a sum. Okay, so that gets me the 41 files that were here. This would be the sum. Okay, so that would be adding it up. Now, if I wanted to use just this number as a property with my group object, I would have to isolate that out. Okay, so be able to just extract that value out of all of this, right? So remember that even measure object, it does create an object in its own right, this generic measure info, and I want the value out of sum. Right? So basically I want to extract the value that's in here. Okay. So to do that, there's basically like it's like three different ways you could do it. Okay, so the first one is you could use the for each object commandlet and just tell it using member name. You basically want it to work on the membership of a property or a method. So in this case, if I just type member name sum, okay, if you look right down here, that'll grab that number directly. Okay, notice it tossed out all of the other stuff here and just left me with that. So in fact, if I pipe this to get member, I can see that it is giving me a number. So it's not the generic measure info anymore. It's literally the value that was in there. And notice it's noting that it was a double, so that's what I now have in my pipeline. Okay, so that's one way you could extract a value out of a property for another object that's in the pipeline. So with for each object, a lot of people like to use it because you can heavily abbreviate it. So you just saw me run it, with the full name and the parameter and whatnot. But for each object has an alias. If we come down to the command here, watch what I type in. It's just percent. Right? So, and then I want to use sum. So member name is a positional parameter. So if I supply a value, PowerShell is going to automatically direct it to this parameter. So instead of typing all this out, I can just literally type that and notice it works. Okay, so for each object is a great way to extract a value out like this without a lot of typing. Another way you could do it is to use select object, and you use a value called expand property, and that will do it as well. Now, there's not much abbreviation you can do on this. Expand property is not positional, so you can't just remove it. It has to be, it's a parameter that has to be typed out in order to be able to use it. Okay, and select object, about all you could do here is use the alias, which is just select. So this one isn't as much of a fan of mine because of that. You can't really abbreviate it too much. And then the last way you could get what you're looking for here is to take the original commands that produce that output, wrap them in parentheses. And so basically the inside the parentheses stuff runs first, and it's producing that type of object, right? This generic measure info. And then you can treat the outside of the parentheses kind of like you would a variable, where you can do a dot and then specify the value, the property you want to grab the value out of, like so. Right? So that's a few different ways to just get that number out if we wanted to do that. Okay? So with that being said, let's go back to our group object here, and let's put together some output with the count, the name, which would be the file extensions here, and then the size of all of them. Okay, so let's bring this over. We're gonna need to do select object because I need the count property. I need the name property. And then what I need to do is I need to make a calculated property. So calculated property is one where you're making what you want the property name to be and what value you want to put in it. So to do this, I make a hash table. So hash table is you do an @ sign and an opening and closing curly bracket. Now inside the hash table, you need two values. You need whatever you want to call the property, which you can use name or label. So I could do like name equals or label equals, right? Either one will work fine. I usually use name. And so name equals, and then what do I want to call this? Maybe I'll call it size KB because I'm going to round this to kilobytes. One of the crappy things about size is that it's in bytes. So I probably want to make that kilobytes eventually, right? Or megabytes or gigabytes, whatever unit works for you. I'm going to go with kilobytes. So that's what I'm going to call it. So name equals, and then in quotes, whatever you want to call the property. And then a semicolon. Then you need an expression equals, but that can also be abbreviated down to just E equals, like so. And then whatever you want to put in for the value there. And that goes inside of a script block. So again, a script block, just an opening and closing curly bracket. And inside that script block, you can reference the objects that are in the pipeline by using variables like $PS item or $_. So what I want to do is I want to work on group. Okay, so that's what I want to start with. So I'm going to take the object in the pipeline, which again would be each of these kind of group info objects here. So if I work on this, this group property would literally have the 127 PS1 files in it. So that's what this is representing. So I want to work on that. So the object that's in the pipeline, the group property, and what I want to do is I want to do, we're going to do measure object. And what do we want to measure? We want the length, and we want to grab the sum out of that. Right? And then remember that gives us that whole, let's see, where is it? This whole thing. So I need to extract just that value, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to use the last method that I showed you. I'm going to take this whole script block, like put it in parentheses to kind of like run that first. And then outside of the parentheses, but still inside the script block, I'm going to grab the sum like so. All right. So now I go ahead and run this, and that gives me the size. Now the size is not in kilobytes yet. I haven't done that. So this is in bytes right now. Okay, but that's kind of our first piece here. Now, what I could do if I want to convert this into kilobytes is I can take that number and I can divide it by 1024, okay, and let PowerShell spit out the answer. Okay, so that's one way to do it. You could also, if you want in megabytes, you can further divide by 1024 and whatnot. But PowerShell also knows what 1 kilobyte is, 1 megabyte, 1 gigabyte, right? It knows those values. So I could take the number that I had here and just divide it by 1024 divided by 1 KB. And notice I get the same answer as if I did the dividing by 1024. So you've now converted this over to kilobytes. Now the downside of doing this is it gives you like 8,000 decimal places of precision, which is not what I want. So there's like an easy way and a hard way to do this. Basically, like the easy way is if you want PowerShell to just make a whole number, what you do is you use the as operator and you cast this as an integer, which has no decimal places. It's a type of number. It's a type of .NET number that has no decimal places, and it'll just give you the whole number. So for me, that's normally good enough to do, right? So you could also use um, the format operator to give 2 decimal places. That one's kind of kludgy because it's not text. Format is usually made for working with text. You can also use the math class in the .NET framework using the round method. So you could do math double colon round. Again, I'm doing this from memory, so bear with me. Uh, let's see, 29700. Hold on. Let's do this the right way. Let's grab this and then say we want 2 decimal places. And there we go. So that could be another way of potentially, rounding to 2 decimal places. Take your number and do that. Okay, so again, let's put this back into our original here. So here's here's bytes, and if I want kilobytes, I can take this, take the sum, and cast it as an integer. And there we go. Right? So we could do something like that. So that gets us, kind of this grouping. We could see, how many of each file we have, uh, the type of file extension it is, and the size of all of those files. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you could do something like sort object, where maybe you want to sort on the count property, something like that, and we'll do descending sort, so the biggest ones are up top. So you could see it kind of sorted that way. Or another way you could do is obviously instead of count, maybe sort on size KB. And now you're sorting this way, right? So which ones are taking up the most amount of space, and then you could see the counts on them, right? So that's a couple different manipulations we could use with group object here. And this is one I use a bit if I want to do kind of like a reporting of what is in a particular directory structure and the size that goes along with it. Okay, so how many files I have for each file extension and the size that each of them is reporting to. All right. So hope that helps some people out in using this commandlet. And if you have any questions or comments, obviously feel free to throw them down in the comments area for the video. And if you like this, you like my other content, again, I am trying to get subscribers, so I hate just calling everybody out. But if you could, it costs you nothing, and it is a great benefit to me if you could do a subscribe, do a like, all that good stuff. All right. So have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video.